What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today is a special day. We have gone a year without it, and he has come back like the Avatar. When the world needed him most, we got yards created for 2024. We have Graham Barfield to talk through this year's running back class. How are you doing, Graham?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Yeah, fun week with the draft right around the corner. Good to chop up these running backs with you. And this is a bad class. I think everybody kind of knows by now, but it's an interesting group. Excited to talk to you about it today here.
Yeah, and I don't like. Of course, there's not like a Bijan Robinson this year, but like when you look at a lot of the top running backs, they all kind of come, or not all of them, but a lot of them do come from weird places where we've had the weirder like Antonio Gibson profiles and Tony Pollards and Ramondre Stevenson's kind of come out of nowhere, and I think that that's kind of the beauty of yards created. You can kind of find the more like hidden gem type of guys. So I did want to talk through yards created first before we preview any of the class because it is a metric you created back in like 2016. And it spotted, studs like it loved Joe Mixon. Even though Darrell Henderson's career hasn't been amazing, but he was someone that you could get pretty cheap in his class. And I would say, hit for like a second round rookie pick or whatever in Dynasty. Kamara, Kareem Hunt. So what is this yards created per attempt stat, and where can you find it?
Sure. So yards created per attempt is my attempt at not necessarily divorcing offensive line play from running back play, but kind of giving just better context. So yards created per attempt is basically all the yards a running back gains after the offensive line has or has not done its job. And I also chart missed tackles forced. So I chart missed tackles forced by elusiveness, power, and speed. So basically, anytime a running back, let's say, Marshawn Marshawn Lloyd just juked a running back out of his shoes, but he wasn't contacted. I'm charting that as yards created after he forced a missed tackle. And this is the difference between yards after contact and especially yards per carry and yards created. Is it's not perfect. It's not a perfect process, but it does kind of give the tackle breakers and the elusive players a little bit bigger of a bump that yards after contact and some of other missed tackle force charting doesn't. And really all this is, Ron, is like just context. Really, I sent out for this to be a descriptive stat, not necessarily a predictive stat. You highlighted a couple of the hits, and there's a few. There's definitely been some misses for sure. Joe Williams back in the day. Shout out Joe Williams. We liked him quite a bit. He went to San Francisco. Did not work out. There's been some misses on the low end too. So yards created, again, not perfect, but the last time I studied it back in 2021, it was pretty much the best predictive metric in terms of future fantasy production. So I went back and looked, yards created per attempt, pulled all the production metrics, pulled all the big combine metrics, and YC did pretty well. I haven't looked at this in the last couple of years, so that those numbers are a little bit out of date, but yards created I was really, really excited to dive into this class just because, like you noted, this is kind of just a wide open group. I've seen every sort of ranking from RB6 on in this class. So, man, excited to chop it up and excited to see where these guys go. I think late day two, round 3 is going to be really busy in a couple days.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And like what this chart is showing is just correlation. So a stat to career fantasy points per game. And like pretty much once we were talking about draft capital, yards created is one of the best metrics out there to look at. And you can find this on fantasypoints.com. You were saying that this article is free. I believe that the data, like you have data going back to 2016, if you want to look at that. And it's actually something that I input in my running back model, which is why I won't say upset, but I was very bummed out that we didn't have it last year because I would have loved that data. And then getting it this year, I'm stoked. So that's why I'm having Graham on to talk through the running backs. I'm much more numbers oriented, where I know yards created is a film process, which is what's so fun about it, and why it's kind of the same idea as like with Matt Harmon when I talk to the receivers. He's looking at what's going on the field. I'm looking at the numbers. So it's always something that I can kind of learn from. Now, I wanted to talk with you about Marshawn Lloyd. He pops the most in this class. I've heard a lot about him where I know he tore his ACL early, was a big time recruit. He is like very explosive. I've heard his vision is like sometimes hit or miss, but he does have like home run ability. What do you see with Marshawn Lloyd?
Well, every running back tore their ACL in this class. Trey Benson tore his ACL. Marshawn Lloyd tore his ACL. Blake Corum didn't tear his ACL, but he ripped up his meniscus pretty bad. Obviously, Jonathan Brooks is coming off an ACL. So that's the interesting thing about this class, right? Is like no one is squeaky clean. That being said, Marshawn Lloyd, in terms of yards created per attempt, absolutely smashed the rest of this class. 5.66 yards created per attempt. That's 86th percentile all time. Really, really strong. He was also very elusive too. 0.43 missed tackles forced per attempt. That's like in the 90th percentile since 2016. I will note, like you said, I did not have the 2023 class charted. I'm going to go back and rewatch them this summer when I get some time, and we'll get the full, man, we'll get the full database going back. But man, Lloyd in this class just really stands out. You noted his vision. I think some of it is just small sample stuff. Like he only had last year, he had 10 or more carries in just 4 of 11 games. I mean, USC's offense, rightfully so, was built around, RPO and Caleb Williams. So I think some of it is just not necessarily his. I didn't really see bad vision. If anything, there's some inconsistency with his processing. And I think that's the big difference. Is there's just times where, he basically USC ran gap like 60% of the time, and he would just kind of get stuck a little bit maybe. But I didn't see bad vision at all. I saw an incredibly creative player. Again, small sample stuff going on, but basically every running back in this class is kind of small sample-ish. All of that being said, I just think he stands out the most amongst a kind of bad group. Again, top of the class in yards created per attempt, just ahead of Jaylen Wright. He's also top of the class in missed tackles forced per attempt. And basically, if you went back and just, you were talking about you put yards created per attempt in your model, that's great. If you wanted to train your model on YC, missed tackles forced, and then draft capital and athleticism, I think you'd probably just be like 90% of the way there. Because missed tackles forced is just massive. Like if you look back at the last, I have it since 2016, you sort by missed tackles forced per attempt, and it's basically just a laundry list of very productive or RB1 type fantasy backs. And Marshawn Lloyd scores right in the middle of those types of guys. So to me, he's a tier 1 player in this class. I'll tell you right now, Ron, I have no idea who goes RB1. Jonathan Brooks is the favorite. I said in my article, I would not debate you if you have him RB1, but I think this class is wide open, and I think Lloyd deserves to be in that tier 1 along with Brooks and Benson.
Yeah, he's really fun. Like in terms of the numbers for Marshawn Lloyd, like he tested very well. He's like super compact, where he's like under 5'9", but he's 220 pounds, runs a 4.4.
He's like a perfect build. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like almost a kind of a classic running back. Like one of these comps in like the RAS database that comes up for him is like D'Angelo Williams, which I kind of like as like a small, compact, like fast running back. Which doesn't shock. I mean, 4.4 speed on a guy who was like a highly touted recruit does make sense. And he does catch passes as well, which is like what I'm always looking for. Like especially in his 3rd season. So I think that was his first year, or no, maybe his last year at South Carolina. But he caught passes a decent bit. Like he looks like an all-around guy. And I want to say he went 3rd round. Like Brugler did like a 7-round mock, which is like insane. But he did have Marshawn Lloyd going day 2. But I think you make a good point that like late day 2 is going to be where we kind of hold our breath with this running back class, and it's kind of going to make or break a lot of these guys.
It will. Obviously, Dallas, Arizona, those 2 teams desperately need backs. They've got a ton of capital in that kind of day 2 pocket. So, yeah, I'm expecting some fireworks kind of round 3. I think Marshawn Lloyd and Jaylen Wright and Trey Benson and Jonathan Brooks, they all kind of go in that like 65 to 90-ish pocket. And yeah, I think you're right. It's just going to be a very landing spot dependent class. And Marshawn Lloyd is definitely no different. He's definitely not squeaky clean, man. I mean, transferred, so doesn't have a big production profile. And then, last year he, was not necessarily a volume runner by any means, but, small sample was really, really good on him.
Yeah. And I will say as well, I have just my database. It's not in my model or anything, but a percentage of rushes that are 15 yards or more. So like breakaway rushes, he's second in this class. With like 11.76% of his runs. So he's like explosive. He catches passes. He's really fun. I did want to ask, I saw like the way that you structured your article, you have tier 1 and it's Trey Benson, Jonathan Brooks, and it's Marshawn Lloyd. I imagine, is this you saying like Trey Benson's your RB1, or is it more so just like kind of bundling them all together? Because I am curious, because I talked about with JJ Zacharyson about his model, and it's kind of similar how I approach things. I imagine your running back rankings isn't just, sorting yards created and then like, having that as your ranking. So how do you kind of wrestle the 2 of them, where you're like, you're charting yards created, you're watching them on film, and then you're deciding how they're going to be for, dynasty fantasy football or fantasy football in general?
Yeah, so two things. I'm always changing up the way I'm ranking players, right? Like it's a constantly evolving process. And in the past, I would have done more linear ranks, but for this class, because I felt like it was so wide open, it really felt like once I started, getting into the film and watching these guys and then putting the data together, just some clear tiers started to evolve. So just this season, it just made more sense to do it this way. You mentioned it earlier, how big of a part, potential on passing downs is. And that was a big part of my process this year. It wasn't just, going off yards created. It was like, okay, these are the guys that can clearly create on their own. They're elusive. They're in that upper right quadrant of yards created in missed tackles forced. That's Jonathan Brooks, Trey Benson, and Marshawn Lloyd. Plus, all those guys can play on passing down. So that was like the clear tier 1 to me. And we'll get into tier 2 and tier 3. But the tier 1 guys were basically the extremely creative players who can create, regardless of their system, and also are really good, at least projection on passing downs. Trey Benson and Jonathan Brooks and Marshawn Lloyd, we wish we would have a little more production profile, but the little bit we do have in the film on them is really good in that department.
Yeah, and I will say Jonathan Brooks is so interesting to me. I imagine, the lens of this video is definitely a lot more dynasty oriented. I know we talked before the show. You've been doing this since, 2016. You've been doing fantasy football stuff since like 2013. I imagine you probably have some like very long standing dynasty leagues. I mean, I hope that none of them have, or, a good chunk of them haven't folded. How are you because this is the interesting part with Jonathan Brooks for me, is that he's the youngest running back in this class. So he's 20 years old, early to declare, as good excuse as any that he didn't produce early, right? Bijan Robinson's there, Roshan Johnson's there. I'm not sure if he overlapped with Keontae Ingram. I don't think so. So like, he's so tough, because if I want to draft a running back, I normally want to win in fantasy football, right? Like I don't want to hold on to a running back when I could just maybe, let's say it's like an early second for Jonathan Brooks. I can just get an early second next year, or like maybe bundle that early second with another player and get a first next year. So from like a game theory perspective, how are you looking at Jonathan Brooks, like in terms of like expectations in year 1, and kind of like how he, develops over the course of like a year or two? Because like the ACL, it makes it so confusing, where he would be the clear cut, in my eyes, the clear cut RB1 without kind of the ACL and that the medical red flag. So how are you kind of juggling all that with Jonathan Brooks?
So the film and the yards created on him are very, very strong, right? Like just off the top, I think we can cover that first. In this class, he's third in yards created per attempt. He was second only behind Marshawn Lloyd and missed tackles forced. I noted in my article, man, he has just some nasty jump cuts. Like his feet are so in sync with his eyes. It's unbelievable. Definitely in terms of just like NFL readiness, Brooks has the most NFL ready, kind of basically bag put together. But yeah, you mentioned it, man. The ACL is a concern. It's a little bit of a concern for me too, that I think if there's one red flag I can put on Brooks, and it's a very, very small red flag, he doesn't have home run speed. And in the past, I've been on prospects like Kareem Hunt, Alvin Kamara, even to a certain extent. Those guys coming out necessarily didn't have home run speed, but they were extremely elusive. And Jonathan Brooks is absolutely extremely elusive. He has like just nasty jump cuts. Basically, he has the ability to like start and stop with, and the twitchiness of basically any running back in this class. I mean, it's freak athleticism. You mentioned it. He's one of the younger players in the class that's going to help him, hopefully recover from his ACL. I saw a note from Adam Schefter in one of his articles that he put out, just like a draft tidbits article. And you know that John Brooks had ACL surgery on December 1st last year, which is huge because that's 9 months removed. He'll be ready August 1st. So to me, I'm not really even dinging him all that much for the ACL, because like I mentioned at the top, Benson has an ACL, Corum's coming off a meniscus issue, Lloyd has an ACL in his history. So all of these guys, like I said, have, medical histories. To me, the big thing for Brooks is I think he's more of a 4.55 runner as opposed to like a 4.4 guy. And, if there are any lingering effects after this ACL, the speed would be absolutely one of them. Our guy, Edwin Porras, who's, in my opinion, the best injury expert in the game, worked with the Twins last year. Now he's working with professional athletes out here. in Denver. And, I've picked his brain a million times about ACL injuries. And the good news for Brooks is it seems like this is, clearly just a clean ACL. He didn't have like an MCL or meniscus issue. So for me, I think Brooks should be, maybe not 100% week 1, but he should be really close to returning to form by like, middle of the year. Long term, man, I'm crossing my fingers that Dallas gets him. That's been my number one, my hope all along is Brooks would go to Dallas. But I think, we were just talking through Marshawn Lloyd off the top. He's probably maybe the most landing spot dependent back in this class in the top 5. I think Jonathan Brooks is the least landing spot dependent back in this class, just in the way he wins. NFL is very zone heavy blocking, and Brooks is just going to dominate inside, outside zone. He's just tailor made for it.
Yeah, he's interesting. I think as well, I've heard this brought up where if you want to kind of get like zoom out and talk game theory, I kind of like the idea of like we saw Jameson Williams come in off the torn ACL. And even though he did like pretty much nothing in year 1, his value, retained into the offseason because it was like, well, what did you expect? He's coming off a torn ACL. So I could kind of see that being similar for Jonathan Brooks, where like the expectations are low. So like he could either like really far out, outperform those, or if he's like just fine, it's not like you're going to lose a ton of value with him. So he's really fun. I was going to ask, this is a weird question. I'm not sure how much you were aware of this chatter during the combine, but I heard a lot of like comps that he was going to be like James Cook or like maybe like sub 205, and he comes in at 216. Was that like surprising for you? Do you think that his playing weight's a little bit lower than that, or did you think that like 216 made sense for him?
No, he looked every bit of about 210 on tape. Maybe a little bulkier, but I mean, ironically, him and Benson are the same exact measurements: 6'0", 216. So yeah, I mean, ideal size there. Like I said, maybe he cuts back and he plays around 210 just to get some of that burst and acceleration back off the knee. But man, just being a lover of running backs and watching 80 plus of these guys the last 10 years, like Brooks, just in terms of his craftsmanship, in terms of just how he understands how to set up blocks, especially in zone, like he's up there in terms of just fun, to watch, honestly.
He looks like one of these modern, like run, like kind, because we're kind of seeing like, not that he's this small, but you don't have to be, Jonathan Taylor or Derrick Henry of like 225, 230 to be effective anymore. We're seeing, last year was almost like, I almost kind of called it the year of the small RB, where we had Raheem Mostert, you had Devin Achane, you had Jahmyr Gibbs, and I think Brooks is obviously probably like a tier above them in terms of size, but like 6 foot 210, that does the job for me. I did want to ask, because we're kind of talking to the tier 1 guys, Trey Benson, he seems like someone I can sometimes, I will say, because I've been following yards created for a while, I can sometimes, like, I knew you were going to really like Kenneth Walker because I know he popped that year.
Yeah.
And he was someone that, like, the film guys, like, he just runs different. And it's like, all right, this is going to be a yards created guy. I was surprised that Trey Benson, like, wasn't a little bit higher here. But I do know, like, his breakaway stuff is good. His missed tackles forced per attempt is, like, right there with Jonathan Brooks. So I'm curious kind of how you see him with, like, the dichotomy of, like, his yards created is not a red flag. It's fine. How are you kind of viewing Trey Benson? Because he seems like some people are very excited about.
Yeah, so I go into every class with like no bias. Basically, I want to like come into every class with as clear of eyes as I possibly can have. I watch college ball as much as I can, but not too much. I'll be honest with you. I thought Benson would score a little higher than this too, but I think this is a huge credit to Florida State's offensive line. They were just absolutely bullying people last year. They set up basically, nearly 60% of their carries were man or, gap blocking, and they were just absolutely mauling dudes. So, Benson really benefited from a great offensive line, but he did pop in his missed tackle force numbers. And that's, again, that's what matters to me, maybe not just as much as yards created, but almost as much. In this class, Benson, 0.36 missed tackles forced per carry, third best in the class behind Lloyd and Brooks. You mentioned it. We're looking for guys that can play on passing downs, and Benson, man, just has such elite elusiveness. He's, always fighting for extra yards, and he showed good hands. As a runner, the big question I have with him is he's like the complete opposite of Jonathan Brooks. I think Brooks is going to immediately be one of the best zone runners in the game. I think Benson is like a Travis Etienne type. I think he's a guy you're going to want to set up with gap and kind of pin pull sweeps where you're pulling a guard, you're pulling a tackle, and you're kind of giving him a lane to run down, and then letting him use his kind of one cut slashing kind of fast ability to get upfield. He's very, very good at understanding how to set up blocks in man blocking. Like he's ready to take care of his week one for this sense. And he has great contact balance. He's constantly fighting for extra yards. I think Josh Norris called him hidden yards a couple years ago. I love that. Trey Benson is the hidden yard GOAT in this class. We were talking through Brooks, 6 foot, 216. He's got great athleticism. Benson, to me, I have him like RB1A in this class. I think you could have him as low as like RB3 or RB4, depending on what team you are. Because like I said, I think there's some concerns with Benson as a zone runner. He's just not, there just was a little bit of processing speed problem with him. Like he would get a little ahead of his blocks or he'd be a little bit behind. His eyes wouldn't be in the right spot. But man, when he put it all together, especially on like their man and gap stuff, it was tremendous. So Benson to me is, of the tier one guys, Lloyd and Benson are probably the most landing spot dependent. And then Brooks is, pretty clean in that aspect. Benson, not that I really care too much about this, but it is worth saying, he only had 6 games where he carried the ball more than 15 times in his career out of 26 games. A little bit of a concern. Last year, he only had 1 game with 20 or more carries. At the end of the day, with these guys are on like volume wins fantasy championships with running backs. And I'm afraid that all these guys in this class, except for maybe John Brooks or the 12, 13, 14, 15 touch guys, and they never really make it past like RB2 levels. I could see that with Benson, but if we're talking upside and just like range of outcomes, Benson has the highest ceiling in this class.
Yeah, that's definitely always the concerns, and then that's like what we talked about earlier, where it's going to kind of come down to pass catching, because kind of like the tipping point for these guys is going to be like if there's an injury in the backfield. And then can you keep away your, I don't really know who the modern version of this would be, but, your Nyheim Hines types and your J.D. McKissick. Can you keep those guys off the field? And that's kind of what it's going to come down to. But I loved Etienne coming out. I kind of do like the idea of like Travis Etienne light for Trey Benson. I was going to ask as well. I was going to say I did want to get into the guys who didn't score as well, but I'm looking through here. And this guy seems super polarizing as someone that breaks down running backs, because I wouldn't know what to do with him. And that is Jaylen Wright, because I see here he's second in yards created per attempt in this class, but he has, I think this is going to be the lowest 8+ men in the box rate or men in the box rate in this class, where Josh Norris has shown like screenshots where like the offense that Tennessee runs, there's just like no one in the box ever because they're spreading everything out. So you're not really getting like NFL reps when you're watching them. So kind of like how do you even like where are we at on Jaylen Wright? Like how do we even sort of contextualize all of that?
Yeah, and that's so his yards created metrics, his missed tackles force metrics are tier 1, but the context around the offense is kind of what makes it tier 2. Jim Nagy, who helps run the Senior Bowl, he has a good quote about, whether something is a reason or an excuse, right? And to me, this isn't an excuse for Jaylen Wright. It's just a reason that he can't do anything to how they change their scheme. He can't do anything about how he split touches with 2 guys that are worse than him. He can't do anything about the offensive coordinator running freaking bunch sets to the wide side of the field like every single play, and basically never like it was. A Mickey Mouse offense is putting it lightly. I mean, it was truly a contrived offense. 9% of Jaylen Wright's carries went into an 8-man box. 9%. That's, if you're looking back at the last, however many draft classes, 8 draft classes since 2016, it's really, really low. Only a handful of players have been lower. That being said, though, when Jaylen Wright gets, he gets green grass in front of him, he gets into that second level, he's right there with Benson and Lloyd in terms of his elusiveness. He has absolutely nasty full speed jukes. Like this dude can basically make you fall out of your shoes, not missing a beat in his speed, man. He gets into the second level against a linebacker, a corner, a safety. Like he's taken their soul. And that is the type of skill that I personally love to see on tape. It's not necessarily, okay, yeah, sure, they're running into this dumb box where there's only 2 defensive linemen in there and they got three linebackers. And, because you got an ocean or whatever to the right side of the field, it definitely makes it look weird, right? But like when he got into the second level, and, he got into the second level often because this Tennessee offensive line was pretty good. And then you mentioned the fact that, they basically never saw extra defenders in the box. He definitely was running into some really advantageous situations, but, the elusiveness was elite. Contact balance was elite. His game against Florida is the best game I watched of any running back this year, like hands down. I mean, he was dominant, absolutely dominant in that game. One of the main reasons they stuck around in the game. Wright is massively, massively landing spot dependent. Like thinking back of the last couple classes around, like, I've been thinking about this a lot. It's like, I can't remember a group where I felt like almost every back is landing spot dependent, where, like even the 2019 class, we had like Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery. Like David Montgomery could have gone to any NFL team and he probably would have been good. You know what I'm saying? Like he was just that high floor of a prospect. Jaylen Wright does not have a high floor. Marshawn Lloyd, not a high floor. But the ceiling on these guys, like really, really strong. Like I kind of came into this class not expecting much ceiling, but I think these 4 guys plus Estimate and Quorum, there's enough here for this class to be a little more productive than most of us are thinking. But I mean, the floor on Jaylen Wright is really, really low. But not to go too long-winded, but I mean, there was plenty of processing issues on his tape too. Like I typically focus on positives over negatives. What can you do? What does correlate to, success in the NFL? What traits will roll over day 1, week 1 in the NFL? And Jaylen Wright does possess a lot of those, especially in terms of his elusiveness and speed and processing. But the vision there for him is not great. And then you add in the fact that he didn't really see too many stack boxes, and he ran behind some really easy blocking. It definitely makes the projection a lot harder. But hopefully, yards created kind of illuminated how much upside this guy really does have.
I'm curious about it with the landing spot for Jaylen Wright. What's like a spot where you'd be stoked? Like he goes to this spot and it's like, all right, wheels up. Jaylen Wright's gonna kill the league. Arizona.
Yeah. He can be the 3 down. I think he's got 3 downs in his range of outcomes. He's a good pass protector too. I usually don't really care too much about pass protection. Marshawn Lloyd graded out extremely poorly. If you care about that kind of stuff, Jaylen Wright was pretty good. I think Wright has 3 downs in his, his range of outcomes. That being said, though, man, I mean, there's a chance too, like, between his lack of reps, especially running in between the tackles on inside zone stuff, like, we just really kind of don't know. It's a wild card with him.
I was going to ask too with the, Trey Benson, because you said there's something there. I will say the gap zone stuff is a little bit over my head. And I've heard the same thing. I think it might have been also using fantasy points data. I think it absolutely was actually. It might have been a Scott Barrett tweet actually. Kind of breaking down how like we're going off the tracks here, but like Dameon Pierce was someone that looked sick in year 1. And then you get Slowik coming in with the 49ers scheme, and he's just, like he's getting outplayed by Devin Singletary there. They bring in Mixon, who's like also, I believe, a poor fit in that zone scheme. What's kind of like is that just like a Shanahan McVay thing where it's like that extreme that like some running backs can't thrive in that role, or and like kind of how does Benson sort of fall within the that whole thing of like zone versus gap?
Yeah, so the way you can identify zone versus gap blocking is really easy. When you're watching the tape, zone is basically when the offensive line just has like an area they have to go block for. So if you're looking at the right tackle, like he's either going to block the edge defender or the tight end. And man, they have just like literally a specific man they have to go get, right? And in the case of Benson, you'll see, and this is common across college football now, you'll see these like kind of pin pull sweeps basically. There's a number of different ways you can call them, whatever. But basically the bottom line is you'll have like a guard or a tackle sweeping out, kicking out, not blocking anybody interior. He's going to go out and he's just going to find whatever open linebacker or defensive end that is on the edge that they're trying to get the play design to go to. So you can pick up man and zone like really easily just on those two things. Man is, not always gap pin pull. You'll have man blocking schemes where you just have a tackle go up and get somebody that kind of looks like zone. But you can identify it a lot easier than you think. As for fits, I think so much of this just comes down to offensive line in the NFL. Like that's the big differentiator, right? Is that you'll have teams that, for the 49ers, for example, like because of Shanahan, because of his just Rolodex of running plays this dude has, they're just doing shit differently than a lot of teams do. And they identify offensive linemen and their traits a little differently than other teams do. So I think when we look at it at the NFL level, it's more of an offensive line thing. I think most guys at the NFL, like Saquon Barkley for sure, Dameon Pierce might be a good example. Some guys are better zone versus man, but the big kicker, when I've looked into it at least, it's almost always like an offensive line stat. However, in college, because the game is so different, because the hashes are so wide, because there's just so much more space to deal with. In Tennessee, honestly, Jaylen Wright is pretty much the perfect like conversation point for this. It does make the projection so much harder, right? And it does, like, it's just that added like reason. It's not an excuse, but it's just the context behind it. And at the NFL level, yeah, sure, there's not a lot of like 1-for-1 carries that Jaylen Wright has that are going to cross over, that he'll see 5 guys in the box in the NFL. It just doesn't happen. But like I said, everything happens after he gets in the second level or he jukes a guy out in the backfield. When the ball is in his hands, like, he's a freak. And I think when we're looking at college guys, that's really what we're looking for, is what happens when the ball is in your hands. The NFL is just so much more of a offensive line driven game. And then the guys like Saquon Barkley or like Derrick Henry that can rip off the big gains, those are the guys that really stand out.
Yeah, and like the way that you're describing this, as I'm like kind of thinking through it, it's kind of a bummer that Miami has Achane and like their running back room is good, because it does seem like those like weird like pitches that are like inside runs that they do with like all of the weird swinging tackles and
Tell you
all of
what,
the like
Mike
misdirection.
McDaniel's been watching some college ball, man.
Yeah.
After watching, I watched Isaiah Spiller in the 21 class, and I remember watching Achane. I'm like, yeah, Achane's just better. But dude, McDaniel's definitely been watching some college ball and stealing some of these run designs from these college coaches. I gotta real quick. We should get into the second tier. Like, we should talk through Blake Corum and Audric Estime.
Yeah, because they're on the other side of the men in the box, right?
Yeah, well, especially Estime. Estime last season, I charted 44% of his carries with 8 or more men in the box. That was way more than I thought. Notre Dame went under center a lot more than I thought. Corum led the class at 50%, but no surprise there. I mean, as you know, Michigan was like, virtually all under center, very slow paced, grinded out kind of methodical attack. Ron, what's real quick? I'll kick it to you, because Blake Corum has been a conundrum to me. Like, what's your take on Corum? I know you said you were doing a ton of underdog drafts. Like, where were you drafting him? Because we'll get to him, but like, I think he's been probably the hardest prospect to kind of figure out for me, and I did not expect that.
Corum is really tough when you look at the numbers of. At first, you see he's like 5'8". He looks like a faster Devontae Freeman. And the thing for me that I think is tricky, because I imagine you when you do the film, I imagine it's mostly the final year. Or do you mix in prior years?
Yeah, it's all final year. Every carry from the final year.
The crazy part about Blake Corum, and it's tough because it's like, I think it'd be more of a question for Edwin Porras or either of us. But you look at Blake Corum, and if you just if you parse the data between after the meniscus tear or meniscus injury, whatever it might have been, and before, it's like night and day. Like before his first 2 years, 6.6 yards per carry, 5.9 yards per carry. Final year, 4.8. Before that, he had 90 plus PFF rushing grade in both years. After that, 83.1. And it's like, this is his most he was a monster, like historically one of the best running back college seasons ever, just because the touchdowns, and he single-handedly ices the game versus Alabama in overtime. But like his missed tackles forced 34%, 29.44%, and then his final year 11.6%. So it's like this like massive like efficiency tackle breaking. His elusiveness rating as well went from 132 to 97 to 27. So it's like the explosiveness went down as well from 15% to 14% to 9.7%. So it's like it's somewhere in between of like it was his final year. They really leaned on him in the offense, so efficiency is going to come down. But then you also have the meniscus part of the equation of like how much do you think that the meniscus injury it affected him this year? Does he fully bounce back to what he was before then? Because if that's the case, then he's very interesting. Does he bounce back to like 80%? Is he just a different guy now? So it's tough to sort of think through it all. But he is somebody I was drafting a decent bit on underdog because he is somebody that's like, he's 24 years old. He's not going to be somebody that ever is like a first or second round startup pick in Dynasty. You're kind of just drafting him for the first year production. And he also caught 24 balls in his second year, which is like, we'll take that for a guy that you think is more of a grinder. So now I do say all this to say I'm not crazy about him. Like I'm not trying to get out of every draft with Blake Corum on my team. But he is somebody that is like definitely interesting that I think skews towards production in year one, especially if he goes to one of those fun, if he goes to Cowboys, if he goes to the Chargers and reunites with Harbaugh. So it's funny because as like a numbers nerd, I fully expect to be like he's 24. Like I'm all right. He doesn't really catch passes. He's undersized. But I do see the appeal.
The reason he's tough to me is because it's kind of like a split brain type thing. Like the old head in me loved his vision. Like there was not a run that I can remember, at least in my head right now, where he was out of place. Like they ran everything too around it, man. They run like duo, they ran gap, they ran zone. He was fantastic in all of it. That being said, though, he was very much, like you said, kind of a grinder. And that's what was so surprising to me. And this is what I'll go back and I'll figure out this summer. I'm going to go back and rewatch Corum's 2022. And I think it's important for him, especially once we get landing spots this week, because if there's a chance that he can get back to his 2022 form, in 2023 was really just like, knee injury. He played in 15 games. They're trying to grind out a national championship. On tape, though, he was very much a one-speed runner. Like he could get to his top speed very quickly, but once he was at that top speed, there was not much burst left. I think the big concern to me is, like I said at the top, I chart missed tackles forced by elusiveness, power, and speed, and he basically had no elusiveness. There were times where, because he's such a fast processor and his vision is so good, he would be in the right place at the right time and he could be able to set his feet and go and make a quick cut, but it just wasn't consistent enough. My numbers were a little higher on his missed tackles forced than some of the other sources I've looked at, just because I think of the context I give to missed tackles forced, but it still was not good. Still second worst in this class, like behind Braelon Allen. Corum is an interesting conundrum, man, because the production was great. And like I said, just watching him, his vision is so good. But there's just times where it's just like, man, like he's getting his 3 to 4 yards blocked on this play, but just not much else. And, maybe we can say, he'll be 18, 20 months removed from the knee injury and he'll be back to form. But there's also a chance this is just who he is now. And, he's 24 years old, like you mentioned, and he's, this is kind of his ceiling already.
Yeah, that's kind of the tough part where, like, I'm very much a guy, I'm trying to shoot for upside across the board. And like, it's tough for me to see where Blake Corum is like this like home run pick where he's like a league winner in like any format. But it does seem like he's a pretty good bet to be like a double. And he should be somebody that hits like I sort of said with the Brooks thing, where if I want to draft a running back, I want to be a contender. And if I'm in like the mid to late second of a rookie draft and like Blake Corum staring me down, he gets like a decent landing spot, I don't mind drafting him because like a lot of my contending teams are like a little bit more zero RB ish.
Yep.
So same. I wouldn't mind, just kind of, you plug him in, you get the production, and that's kind of it. But this, like, I know that some people like almost want to put him at like RB1 and they absolutely love him. It's a bit much for me, just given like the age and it's, the undersized stuff. But I am curious how you feel about Estime. I will throw in there, he's a Jersey. I always mention it when I talk about Estime. He's a Jersey boy. He's from around these parts. And he's somebody like Blake Corum where like he was the engine of the offense, like the men in the box thing. There's going like pretty much the defense is staring you down every play. And he was a monster. I will say that I think the key point, and I think you're going to be in a similar spot to me. Is a lot of people, they cite the 40-yard dash, the 4.7 speed, and it scares everybody. I'm curious kind of what you saw on tape. Like, do you like do you care about the 4.7? Did he look faster than that? How does he sort of, break down for you? I imagine you like him a decent bit if he's in tier 2.
Yeah, I liked Estime more than I thought I would. Like I said, just watching from, just my TV sitting on my ass, not much to do on Saturday nights. Like Estime obviously popped immediately, just his size and his power. The speed is definitely not great. I mentioned at the top, like I don't really view home run speed as a necessary trait to win. The reason I like Estime so much has nothing to do with his speed and has everything to do with his feet. And he uses his 220 frame in a way that's going to immediately win in the NFL. He basically bullies guys that are smaller than him. If he gets on a one-on-one on a safety or a corner in the second level, like that dude is going to get sent backwards, like 100% going to get sent backwards. He has excellent patience. And Notre Dame is one of the rare teams where at least, NFL front offices will have some tape on Estime running under center. It's like did not happen for Jonathan Brooks or Trey Benson. Marshawn Lloyd and Jaylen Wright were never under center. Estime actually has a profile where he ran in shotgun. He can run under center. And he understands outside zone very, very well. My comp for him is like a slow Leonard Fournette.
I love that.
I think Leonard Fournette had home run speed, man. Like he showed it too. Not on tape, but at the combine too. Like Fournette had the home run speed. Estime, 4.7. I don't necessarily think it's a death knell. But the little things that he put together in terms of just how fast his feet are for how big of his frame is, and the missed tackles force numbers were pretty good, right in the middle of the class. Estime just has obviously basically prototypical size at the position. He's a really good pass protector. I don't think he's going to be a guy that we're going to get 50, 60 catches out of ever. But if you do care about pass protection, and I know coaches do, and it does matter to them a little bit, Estime scored really, really well by pass protection execution rate. Unlike Braelon Allen, who's a bigger body in this class and just didn't use it well, Estime did. And, I want to say Estime's, range of outcomes is anywhere from like RB3 to RB6 in terms of draft capital. It seems like he's going to be a little tighter. Whereas, honestly, I could see Marshawn Lloyd being RB1 or RB6. So Estime to me has a pretty high floor. And yards created metrics were definitely pretty promising for him.
Yeah, I love to hear that. He's someone I've also been caping up for, and we're going deep on this running back class. So I will mention, there's this YouTuber Jesse James West. He's like this massive fitness influencer. He's like from around this area, and like there's an old vlog where like during COVID, Estime is like getting workouts in with Jesse James and his crew. So he's like someone who's like in the gym constantly. It doesn't surprise me at all that he's like a willing pass protector and like a very strong dude. I was surprised that he was a running back, because I remember seeing that vlog. He looked more like a linebacker.
Yeah.
And I will say the thing that stuck out for me as a numbers guy, usually I see a 4.7 40. I'm like, man, I don't know. But Estime is different, where he's going to be 20 years old. So we love the youth. And then also in terms of career runs of 15 yards or more, he was at 9.1%. Jonathan Brooks was at 9.2%. Jaylen Wright was actually at 8.7%. So in terms of like explosive run rate, he actually did okay. I know he had one run, maybe it was against it was once against one of those ACC teams where he like broke it off for like 70 yards. So he looks faster to me than 4.7. I would have thought low 4.6s. But I did want to ask you about, because it is a little bit of a bummer that we don't like Braelon Allen a ton, because Braelon Allen is, I'll be honest, I from every guy that watches film that I know, they do not like Braelon Allen. And then I plug him into my spreadsheets, and if he was to have, like, let's say he's not RB1, but if he was to go day 2 and run like a 4.58, his speed score would have been bonkers, and he would be like RB1 by the numbers for me. So I because those things didn't happen, I have him around, like RB8, RB9. But he was someone I was really excited about early on, but then the more I hear about him, the more I'm like, I don't know. So like, what's going on with Braelon now? Because it's like, he's huge. He was like 17 years old in his first year, and we were all excited about him. But I've heard like he doesn't really use his size well, and kind of like because he's maybe has like 15 pounds on Estime. So kind of like what's the disconnect for him?
he had a really good freshman year, right? Really good freshman year. You especially age adjusted. I don't really care about age adjusted production for running backs. It really just matters more for receivers and tight ends. But like it just seems like he plateaued, right? Like he had the freshman year that was really good, and he plateaued. I will say the scheme change. You know, we were talking earlier about how much scheme matters. And in Braelon Allen's sense, it definitely matters. Wisconsin went from a basically like the old school, like under center
Hmm.
heavy offense that you can remember from the Jonathan Taylor days to a lot more shotgun and a lot more zone. And I think that really hurt Braelon Allen. I definitely do not think Braelon Allen is a zone runner in the NFL. I think he's going to be a volume inside kind of guy, not somebody you're going to give outside zone to. 3.66 yards created per attempt, 7th percentile all time. Wisconsin's offensive line, I think, did a really good job last year opening up lanes for him. There was times where Allen had a little bit of elusiveness on tape, and you saw some kind of quick feet, but not even anywhere close to estimate. And he does have ideal size, man. He's 235, like 6'1", 235 with that production profile. Like you would think there'd be something there. But you know, the numbers just really don't back that up though. 0.21 missed tackles forced per attempt, third fewest in this class. Allen has the size, and there were plenty of runs on tape. I mean, I can go back through my charts. Most of his tackles were through power. You know, if he got an opportunity to run over a smaller corner, he can do it. It's just the consistency just was not there with him. And then, you know, you saw the inconsistency in the pass protection too. Like he's a bigger guy. You would think that he'd be able to kind of manhandle some of these blitzers or some of these linebackers that are even smaller than him. And he just was inconsistent there too. You mix in the fumble issues. It just seems like he's a highly inconsistent prospect where like everything kind of has to go right on the play for him to work. That's why he's so low in my rankings, man. I've got him well below a lot of guys. I've got him below Tyrone Tracy and you know, well below Audric Estime and Blake Corum in tier 2. The thing with Braelon Allen to me for fantasy, just like looking forward for our game, man, is like he's going to be a goal line dependent back. Like if he's getting touches at the goal line, he could have a Gus Edwards type season where he scores 12, 13, 14, 15 touchdowns. But to me, that's his ceiling.
Yeah, he's pretty much a battering ram. Is like kind of his floor. But I did actually want to ask you about the other running back that's I think you're a little bit higher on him here. You have him, I believe, in tier 3. Is Bucky Irving. He was somebody that was like in contention for RB1 straight out the gate. And then he like tests really bad. He comes in like 5 pounds on, like he's like I think like barely 190. He you know, he runs like a 4.6 or something. And like usually when you're looking at a smaller back, you want them to look like Devin Achane, or they're just like blazing fast. And when you're small and you're slow, and I was also kind of surprised to see that's what 9th of 14 running backs in yards created per carry. Where I've heard some film guys be like, well, just watch the tape on Bucky Irving, the combine, whatever, throw it out. Like he's a great running back. So what did you see there? I know Oregon's offense is like a little bit weird.
Yeah.
What's kind of the deal with Bucky Irving? And like I'm also curious, like how you even think that he fits into the NFL? Because he's smaller. Is he just like is he just a receiving back, or what are we looking at?
For fantasy, that's the big question, right? Is like if he's just kind of like a change of pace receiving back, he's probably never going to be anybody we're on for fantasy. You know, the frame is a concern. I think when you hear your buddies or you hear somebody else say, you know, just watch the tape on Irving, I think what they're probably picking up on is his ability to, you know, force missed tackles. His elusiveness is pretty strong. Like not great, but it's not bad either. Like especially in the context of this class. Irving was just behind Jaylen Wright in missed tackles forced per carry, 6th best in the class. You know, the Oregon offense certainly helped him though. Like, you know, they ran more screens than any team in the country by far. That just kind of the way they set up their run game off the screens and off the spread definitely helped Irving. It also helps that Irving had an awesome center who's going to get drafted in the first round, and he has 2 tackles who look unbelievable. They were just mauling dudes outside. He had the best blocking in the class by far. But when he got in the second level, there's something there. I've left the light on for Bucky Irving just because he's an elusive player who caught 50 balls. Again, a lot of them were off screens, so that, you know, the production is a little inflated for him. That being said, though, I've kept the light on him. He's fallen, man. Ron, dude, he's falling into like the mid 4th round. Like
Yeah.
that is a fall from grace for a guy who's going really early in Devi a long time ago. Like, I've been buying the cheapest Bucky Irving stock I can kind of find. He's undersized, but he does have the production profile as a receiver, soft hands, and he's a little elusive. So I've left the light on, but I think he's probably going to be a 4th or 5th round pick. And unfortunately, those guys just get replaced, almost every year.
Yeah, he's a tough one. I think I did a rookie mock with JJ last week, and he ended up going to the Chiefs on day 3, and we still took him like late third, just because like
Yeah,
it's it's tough.
that
Like
price,
when you
man.
get day 3 and you look like that, like it's tough to be like a superstar. But he could definitely be like I was you could kind of talk me into him being somebody that like sticks around. Like you're like Chris Thompson's or like J.D. McKissick or Theo Riddick, of just like guys that aren't all that sexy, and then you look up one year and it's a bad running back year and they're like RB 21 in points per game, and they like kind of did okay.
Yeah,
Somebody that I
no,
think can be like that,
yeah,
that I'm very happy to see him pretty high, because every film guy that I talk to does not really like him. It's Will Shipley, and I really like Will Shipley.
mm,
10th of 14 in yards created per carry. So it seems like if he's in tier, I mean, we're getting low in the class, but I imagine if he's in tier 3, you're pushing him up a little bit, as like somebody that didn't perform all that well in yards created, but you are definitely a little bit interested in. So I'm curious kind of what you saw with Will
yeah.
Shipley on tape.
Yeah, the thing that stuck out to me is his quickness. Extremely quick player in and out of his cuts, does not lose speed out of his cuts. The problem is he didn't really get into the second level that often last year because Clemson's offensive line was hot garbage. Like these guys were so inconsistent. Shipley, to his credit, I think performed about as well as he could have. Phil Maffa, they have this like hulking, huge running back who's going to come out, I think, next year. He's going to be a guy next year, and he's kind of was a better fit for this offense because he's a bigger guy, and you better battle through contact pretty well behind that offensive line. So I think Shipley just gets dinged just because the offensive line was so bad with him. Like Clemson was really just kind of a shell of itself between their quarterback play, their offensive line play. Shipley is really an easy projection in terms of his pass down work. Like we can quibble and debate. Maybe he's undersized. Maybe the quickness doesn't matter all that much because he really doesn't have a ton of natural power for a guy who's like 205. Those guys are just never going to have too much pop. I think he offers just enough natural power to be able to run inside. But the big thing for him, and the reason I kind of bumped him up in my rankings, is just because he's such a good pass catcher. He was nasty on option routes. Option routes basically you get like a two-way kind of inside outside, and his quickness and his lateral agility on those were really good. So like if there's like a trait that I can project Shipley's immediately going to be able to go and do, it's like, all right, he's going to be an asset for somebody on passing downs. And then you mix in the fact that I think there's something there with his elusiveness and his kind of quickness. Like he's never going to be a 15, 16, 18 carry kind of guy. But maybe if he gets to 12 to 13, there's a chance he's a 11, 12 carry plus 3-4 catch guys, like, a 1A runner at his ceiling. The downside is like, he's probably just a change of pace committee back. And I think that's really kind of everybody in this class. You could kind of make that case for. But Shipley's pass catching is really why he's in tier 3 for me. It's, he's going to be an immediate projection for any NFL team that drafts him. Like they're immediately going to be projecting him to play on passing downs,
Which is like the first step, because then he does have
bro.
size, right?
Yeah.
Like 205. Like then you get your foot in the door with the rushes and you find your way on the goal line. I will say, I mean, it's tough to really project like outside of size, like goal line usage, but he was somebody where I believe like his, I want to say, yeah, he had 15 touchdowns in his second year with Clemson. 15 of them were rushing as well. So I don't know. It seems like in 2023, this Maffa took 13 of their like
Yeah. They gave him that role. Dude, Moff is
yeah.
like 220. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
huge.
so before that, we got that role, and I don't know how you feel about pro day numbers, but like 4.4 speed, like he has the pedigree as well. Where you mentioned Devi, like I believe that he was like maybe like I remember seeing like TikToks of him where he was like a super high 4-star, like a low 5-star of like this is the next Christian McCaffrey, and he's like doing all the agility drills, and of course he's gonna get those comps as like a white running back who catches passes, but he's somebody I really do like as well, and that's a great note as well. The 1.15 yards blocked per carry, because you don't really view Clemson as a team that would have a bad offensive line, but like
Yeah.
since Trevor
It was
Lawrence
awesome.
left, like they've been rough, man. I did want to ask too, uh, what do we got on Ray Davis here? Because I keep seeing like Ray Davis as like a guy that people like. I struggle to get there. Like the numbers don't love him, but it seems like he has a high floor. He is super old. I've heard that he has juice. It seems like he sort of crushed yards created, 7th in this class. What do you see here?
Yeah, he definitely popped a little bit. Weird prospect profile. He's a double transfer from Temple. Then he went to Vanderbilt. So he's going to be, I think, 25 this year in November, which is really old for a rookie. 25 in November. That being said, there's something a little bit there. I wouldn't say I like Ray Davis in the sense that, like, I like Marshawn Lloyd and I like Jaylen Wright. But there's a little something there. 4.41 yards created per attempt, smack dab in the middle of the class. He's also smack dab in the middle of the class in missed tackles forced. Not much home run speed, but he's a lot quicker in his cuts than you might expect. Great lateral quickness, and he polishes runs off with power pretty well. Overall, though, like, he's just right on that kind of tweener. Like, he's a little, he's 5'8", 211, but he's not necessarily a great pass catcher. Like, he did show that ability. He showed a little bit of pass protection ability, but again, it's inconsistent. Like, if you squint hard enough for Ray Davis, there's like a 3-down roll there, but I feel like I repeat myself. He's more likely just like a change of pace, kind of like backup type player. That's not to say that there's not like contingency upside with players like him and Shipley, where, if the starter goes down in front of them, they can't like perform well at like RB2 levels for fantasy. I see Ray Davis as that kind of prospect. Very underrated power though. He's a little shorter, but 210. He's got some good pop on his frame. I think the big question for him, because he's going to be 25 years old this year, is like, there's no chance he gets like any sort of meaningful draft capital. I'd be stunned if he went in the 3rd round. So, if he's like a 5th round, 25-year-old rookie, like, if he doesn't get immediate opportunity to get on the field, like, he could be, falling out pretty quickly. That's for sure.
It is funny you say that too, that like, like these guys are all projections, but like once upon a time, there was a Kentucky running back, Benny Snell, that had like, remember when he had buzz going into the Steelers, like a few years ago?
I hated Benny Snell. I hated Benny Snell coming out.
He's like the perfect plotter.
Benny Snell and Alexander Madison are the 2 plotters that everybody loved and I hated. And it worked out. I think Audric Estime might be a plotter. That's Scott Barrett's guy. He has a plotter fetish for these guys who are like, 220 and run 4.7, but get 20 carries. If there's a plotter in this class, it's probably Estime, but you might be a good plotter.
Now, I did want to ask too, we are running a little bit long, but I'm having a good time just talking through the class with you here. Who are kind of the sleepers you like? Because you have, I don't want to steal your thunder, but one of the guys that's like kind of popping from yards created, I really like as well. So who are like kind of, these late rounds, like we're taking dart throws like the 4th round of rookie drafts, which like, a little bit of a macro take here. Yes, we've had our Pukas in the past here, and we've had like our Romeo Dobbs, but historically speaking, I like taking running back darts in those rounds because, we've seen guys like Ramondre Stevenson and Hubbard. Give them, like, all they got to do is just like rise up the depth chart for 1 week. Their starter goes down, and you turn a 4th round pick into a 2nd round pick, or you can just get that production on your team. So even though you can definitely get cute and try and find the next Puka Nacua, what like running backs are you targeting in these late rounds?
Yeah. So if there's a receiver converted into running back in this class who's in that like Antonio Gibson, Tony Pollard mold, maybe Ty Montgomery on like the low end comp mold, it's Tyrone Tracy from Purdue. 4.77 yards created per attempt, 4th best in the class. Now, again, it's on a small sample, 115 carries, basically him and Marshawn Lloyd are at the bottom of the sample. But man, the sample on Tyrone Tracy is pretty damn good. What really popped to me, man, is his ability to just break off big plays. Obviously stands out, but I think he's got a little more of like grinding ability in between the tackles. The thing that obviously stands out the most is the elusiveness, just really quick cuts. Man, he's like got violent cuts, and he's got ability to like really bend into his cuts. Like, he's a very, very good athlete. You can just tell by his elusiveness and the way he can kind of contort his body and get into his cuts and lean into his cuts and not lose speed. Really strong missed tackle force numbers. I have a metric that I basically just look at how many times you create 5 or more yards per carry, right? Like, it's kind of an arbitrary cutoff, whatever. But Tyrone Tracy led the class. At 38% of his carries went for 5 or more yards created. Going back all time, I mean, the numbers, again, small sample, but that's an elite number. Only Joe Mixon and Sony Michel were better by yards created on creating 5 or more yards on their carries. Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, the guys that are right behind him. Again, it's small sample. I don't want to get too excited about Tyrone Tracy, a converted wide receiver who's going to be really old this year. He played like 6 years in college or something. He's interesting though, man. Like he's on that kind of, like I said, that Ty Montgomery, David Johnson, Tony Pollard, Antonio Gibson spectrum. I think he's on the higher end of the upside of that spectrum. And then for everything else, it's going to come down to landing spot.
Yeah, I like him a lot too. Like you said, like it's a small sample, lack of experience, but that's kind of like also exciting that he did so well on just like his first year of playing running back, and that seems pretty rare,
There was definitely more than a few plays where he was charted with negative yards created because he was so slow to see the holes, and the inexperience kind of shows up when you're looking at on a per play basis. But man, the breakaway speed, the elusiveness, like if you can sell yourself that if he puts this together for like 180 carries during an NFL season, like he could be something for sure.
Yeah, and he's kind of the opposite of like what we're talking about with these guys of your like estimates where you're just kind of like hoping for them to figure out how to catch passes. He played wide receiver, so we know that he can catch passes. He's going to do that out of the backfield. And like he has a size, he's 5'11", 209 pounds, 4.4 speed, 40-inch vertical on top of just
He's a freak.
Yeah, he has the highest like percentage of runs that went 15 or more yards in his career. Now, of course, it's going to be, it's going to be skewed because he didn't have like a
Right.
bad freshman year to kind of take those career stats down, but he is very exciting. And I know like a lot of people are sort of hopping on the train as well. So I like to see that. Like I know Josh Doors has been talking him up. I know Brett Coleman was like comping him to Cordell Patterson the other day.
Wow.
So
wow. That's a crazy good comp. CPAT had some of the most amazing speed in the open field I've ever seen. So that's a hell of a comp.
Borderline one of the best kick returners of all time too. So
dude, it's him and Devin Hester. There's no debate. Like it's Hester's 1, CPAT's 2, and then you could put Dante Hall 3, the human joystick, my guy, at 3. But yeah, CPAT is different.
I did want to ask you about a couple of these other fringe guys as well. If any of them if like you're interested in them at all or not. Sure. Where are we at on Combine Warrior? Isaiah Garendo. He comes out here and just like obliterates the combine. He like jumps as high as you could possibly want. He looks like Jonathan Taylor. I believe that he wasn't even like kind of the focal point of this or maybe it was like him and Jawar Jordan or whatever.
Yeah, Jawar Jordan, small like 190-pound guy, actually got more carries with him. Jordan's gonna get drafted. Maybe not drafted. He'll be like a priority free agent guy too. But yeah, split carries with Jawar Jordan. They had like the kind of the thunder and lightning thing going. The speed on him immediately shows up on tape. I mean, like I said, I chart missed tackles forced by power, elusiveness, and speed. The vast majority of Garendo's were through speed. The problem with him, man, is he has very stiff hips. Good processor. I think the vision is okay with him. They ran basically entirely zone. So he's, they're kind of giving him, 1, 2, and 3 lane and pick from it. He was pretty good at that, but his hips are really stiff. He's never going to be a super elusive player. But man, that home run speed is sexy. It's really sexy. Not gonna lie. He immediately was going to draw the Pacheco comps as kind of like a non-great producer, but same size, that 215, 220, and then he ran like crazy. The difference is Pacheco, man, like Pacheco. I didn't chart him coming out of Rutgers, but like he was the Tasmanian devil. Like you could see everything like that he was good at immediately. He just had no clue where he was going. Grendo's kind of the opposite. Like I think Grendo's processing and vision was pretty good. I think Pacheco is just like different, like in terms of his running style and his elusiveness. I'd want to see a lot more nimble feet out of Grendo before I get excited about him.
I will say the funny part is too that you mentioned Pacheco. And we talked a little bit about me being around Rutgers before the show, and like Pacheco being a really good NFL running back shocked everybody in New Jersey. He was not like he wasn't like
Yeah, exactly.
like Ray Rice and the McCourty twins and Kenny Britt, like all these like not a single person I know that went to Rutgers like either has a Pacheco like a Pacheco Rutgers jersey. Like
Love
he
that.
was pretty much like in terms of like that team's success, like a non-factor. And he ends up, being amazing, which is like pretty funny.
Yeah, well, the Chiefs chased their size speed guys, and they got one right. Yeah, Guerrero, man, is I think probably more of like a sixth or maybe fifth, sixth round type player in this draft. But the combine will probably bump him up into the fourth.
Now, just the last player I wanted to ask you about, I see he's in tier 5. Where are we at on Dylan Lowby? I've heard kind of like all over the place stuff on him. I don't even know how you got the tape of him playing at New Hampshire. Like I don't even know where that's even being sold. So kind of like what's that process like? Because I imagine it's not like I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe you could prove me wrong, but like is it like all 22 or like some of it we're
no,
watching on maybe there's like a camcorder in the audience that's like or not like the stands that's kind of like doing it like panning across. So what does that look?
yeah, yeah. I have a couple of different sources. I had a couple all 22 games, but then I had to go to YouTube for some good old broadcast
Oh
footage.
yeah.
And as you can imagine, the broadcast footage for New Hampshire was not great.
No
It's
shot.
very, very tight angles. So I didn't end up charting his eight or more, like his box numbers. I don't have that up on the site just because I had to watch 3 games on broadcast footage. Um, yeah, man. The obviously the big thing with him that stood out is he's just like their entire passing game. Basically, every third play was a screen to him. There's this one game he played against Central Michigan where like literally they just kept spamming the same play. It's like when you play your brother in Madden and he like can't figure out how to cover crossers. It's like the same thing. Labe is very undersized. It shows up on tape. He's really elusive, quick feet, but does not have any power. I think he's really just like a passing down only guy. Yeah, I think that's probably where he fits in is he's that tweener build. There's so many of these like kind of undersized tweener guys in this class, but the production profile on him on Labe is really good. We had some guys down at the Senior Bowl, Scott Barrett, Brett Whitefield. They liked what they saw to Laube as a route runner, but he's probably he's too undersized, I think, to really be like a factor in the interior running game.
Yeah, you're probably looking at like, sparingly, but he's another one of these guys, you can talk yourself into them being like Theo Riddick and like maybe they have a year down the line where they're like interesting, but that's kind of what you're looking at. I know some people are more optimistic than that, but I like he's not someone I'm all that crazy about. I will say the funny part is like finding the stats for him is like as difficult as finding the film of like having to go through the like stats page of New Hampshire and like try and this was his receiving yard market share and like adding together whatever quarterbacks are at New Hampshire. But I
Yeah,
do
weirdly, not a
what do you
lot of
got?
stats for the Coastal Athletic Association there in the
Yeah.
FCS. Weirdly.
It's always fun, like going through, like when you build a database out and you have to go back to like wherever the hell Pierre Garcon played in college and like
Yeah.
John Brown and all of these guys. David Johnson's are tough. I couldn't even tell you the college. Oh, UNI, I believe it was.
UNI
So
was
it's like,
DJ. Yeah, yeah. Mount Union was Pierre Garcon. I was a big
yeah.
Garcon guy.
So
Yeah.
like that's always Cooper Cup as well, where you're just like digging through the depths of like these like create like boat like some like stat girl like took volunteer hours to like write this stuff down for these
Oh,
guys.
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Some poor unpaid college intern is definitely keeping track of New Hampshire stats.
Yep. But I did want to say I appreciate you coming on, talking through the running back class. Again, it's not as sexy as it could be, but I do think like I would bet any class is going to have a bunch of like, unless if it's like I'm trying to think through. I think the Bishop Sankey class was like pretty damn brutal. But like
Yeah.
outside of that, you're going to get producers somewhere. And we've seen in the past, like I keep coming to that like Ramondre Stevenson and before that Gibson, and you get these guys that come out of like weird places. And I do think that there's going to be a couple in this class, especially with like the running back class is like or the running back landscape as a whole is like kind of nasty right now, where it's like, you have like McCaffrey, Brees Gibbs, Bijan, and then in terms of like that next crop, it's like not a
There's no
ton.
middle
So
class. There's
yeah, so
no
it's
middle
like
class. Yeah.
There's definitely, room for these guys to ascend and just sort of take over running back rooms. So that's kind of exciting in its own right. But let the people know where they can find your work, what you have going on here over the next month or so with the NFL draft wrapping up here on Thursday.
Sure. Yeah, I'm at Graham Barfield on Twitter. You can follow all of my stuff on YouTube on the company account at Fantasy Points on YouTube. We're cranking out YouTube videos a ton over there. I'll have a bunch of yards created content coming out after the draft. Best ball content will be going in May. Ron, you and I need to link up on some best ball stuff at some point this summer. But yeah, tons of stuff coming out on YouTube over there on that front. I'll have like my, best ball roster construction angles and, players to target probably in late May. And then, yeah, man, it's all heads down in June and July. It's crazy. I don't know how you feel. I feel like the front half of this year just absolutely flew by.
Oh yeah, that off season was short lived. Is kind of how I'd put it. The combine came up on us quick, but I appreciate you coming out here, spending some time, taking the time to talk through the running backs, because there's a lot that's kind of unsolved mystery wise in terms of stats. Because you get like the top guys and like speed scoreboard, and you get more fringe range of guys. It's better to hear from someone that's like actually watching and seeing how these things go. So I'll be looking forward. You said we're gonna get the 20. I'm gonna hold you to it. We're gonna get the 2023 class through yards created. Check all that out on Fantasy Points. But for everyone that's watching, I appreciate you guys hanging out with us, watching us talk running backs. As always, if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold.